Hey guys, what's going on? Sam Bosworth here. Today we're going to be talking about why I've turned down the majority of surgery I've been offered of late and why I don't really go to doctor's appointments or to the hospital and get checkups anymore. So let's get into it. That's right guys, today we're going to be talking about something which I think could be a little bit controversial, potentially depending on how you feel about surgery and hospital appointments, etc. And just generally I want to talk about my reasons personally for no longer sort of going to checkups or having surgery or anything like that, and why I don't bother to really visit the hospital anymore for my particular condition. So what I'm going to do here is just give you a brief rundown of what my disability is, how it affects my body. I want to talk about the surgery I have had and my medical journey thus far and sort of how I got diagnosed very quickly, and then I'm going to get into why I really no longer deal with the hospital or specialists anymore. Right, basically I have something called Charcot-Marie-Tooth disease. If you're new to my channel, that is a form of peripheral neuropathy, so basically it affects my hands and my feet the most, but it also affects other parts of my body. The nerves in my legs and my arms pull far too hard on my hands. I have very little muscle definition in my hands. You can see they're really thin. I struggle to do finite things with my hands. I basically can't walk. I use a wheelchair. When I go out, I can use crutches a tiny bit, but for the most part, I tend to use a wheelchair. I'm in a lot of pain all the time. I take strong painkillers. And that's about it. So if you want to learn more about CMT in itself, I do have a video about that on my channel. You can check it out up here, where I talk about it for about 15 minutes. It's the most popular video on my channel, so be sure to check it out if you're interested to learn more about that. So now I'm going to talk about how I got diagnosed and my sort of journey to diagnosis and what surgeries I have had in the past, so that when I talk about why I don't do these things anymore, it might make a bit more sense. So I'm going to start when I was very young, but we're going to move through it quite quickly. I don't want this to be an incredibly long video. When I was young, I didn't learn to walk until I was 2, which is quite late for a child to learn to walk. So my parents knew there was something up there. They started taking me to the doctors, and they noticed that I wasn't growing quite right and that I wasn't developing as I should be. But I lived in the Orkney Islands, which are right at the top of Scotland. There isn't a great health network there. There is a big hospital now and there are doctors and stuff up there, but for the most part there aren't specialists as far as I'm aware. It may have changed now. I haven't lived there for nearly 20 years, so you know, it's a long time. But when I was there and when I was young, certainly there wasn't the resources, there wasn't the help that I needed. But either way, I lived there until I was 10. I got really bad growing pains when I was young. I couldn't run properly. I walked on my tiptoes. So, you know, there was definitely something wrong. My feet didn't develop as they should. But when I lived there really wasn't the resources or the need, I suppose, at that time to discover any further. But eventually I moved down to the northeast of England when I was 10. And I did start seeing more doctors once I moved down there. Obviously, in England, there are many more hospitals and many more specialists to see. So basically from the ages of 13 to 20, I saw the same doctor in the same hospital all the time. I'd go every few months. They would do checkups, they would do x-rays, they would monitor how much worse things were getting, which, as I said, as I hit puberty, they did steadily decline, and they still are declining now. But back then, you know, it was getting pretty bad at puberty. I was in a lot of pain, so I got insoles from the doctor and they helped. I did physio and that helped a little bit. They wanted to do surgery on me then, but due to my age, I was kind of not sure about it. My parents weren't sure about it, so we kind of turned it down. And I'm going to fast forward here because for that sort of 5 to 10 year period, it was the same thing. I would go and get checkups, things would get steadily worse, they would offer me surgery. I didn't think it was that bad, I wasn't in that much pain at the time, so I would turn it down. And it kind of just went on like that until I hit 19 or 20. And around that time, I dislocated my left knee 3 times in 2 months. And obviously, that was an incredibly painful experience for me, but the last time I did it, they decided to put me in a full-length cast, as they hoped that, a full-length leg cast on my left leg, I should say, because they hoped that in doing so, my leg would stay totally straight for so long that my knee would kind of heal itself. The tendons around my knee would get incredibly tight, because that's what happens when a knee dislocates. You have a patella in your knee, and there are 2 tendons, as far as I'm aware, that hold it in place. Like, you've got patella here, 2 tendons holding it in place. The problem with people whose knees dislocate is that these tendons are really stretchy and they aren't tight, so the patella can move too freely and come out of place. So they put me in a full-length cast for, I think, 4 months. Something I should have said at the start when I was talking about how my CMT affected me is that my feet are incredibly twisted to the side like this, so I walk on the sides of my feet, and they're also incredibly highly arched like this. I will get to the point where I show them at some point, but for now I'm just going to talk about it. So really high arches and they're twisted to the side. So when I had this cast on for 4 months, it meant I put no weight on that left foot whatsoever up until around the end of the time where I'd get it off. I could put a little bit of weight on, but not a lot. But basically, when they took the cast off, my left foot had, because it had been in that position for so long and not had weight on it to kind of flatten it out and force it to walk properly, it had completely locked up in that position. So even when my knee was healed, which it is now, I haven't dislocated my knees for a lot of years, touch wood. But even when my knee was healed, I couldn't walk because my left foot had gotten so used to being in that position that there was no amount of physio or anything that could be done to flatten that out. So I had no choice but to have surgery. Now I can't remember the fancy names for the surgery I had. If you Google, if you're a CMT sufferer, if you Google the standard surgeries for CMT, that's what they were. As far as I'm aware, they took a triangular chunk of bone out of my foot, if you like, and then they kind of smushed those two bits together to try and straighten it out. They took a tendon on the back of my calf and they stretched that so that there would be, or they lengthened it so there'd be more for it to move. I don't know, I'm not a doctor. Torsectomy was a word that was getting thrown around a lot back then. You know, I was 18, 19, 20 around that time. I really can't remember exactly what was done, and I don't have any letters that remind me of what it was, but it's pretty standard CMT surgery. I'm in a few groups and a lot of people have had the same thing done. Anyway, I had that surgery. They didn't know that I had CMT at that time, of course. They just kind of decided that that would be the best thing to do for me anyway because of the shape of my feet and everything else. They did these surgeries that so happened to be for CMT. I don't know how they never made the connection. It seems to me like these are the standard surgeries that all the people I know with CMT have had. Surely you could have thought, well, if this is the surgery that these type of people have and this guy has this kind of feet, maybe it's CMT. Anyway, that's probably for a whole different video. I had that surgery. It was a success. It was a long recovery for about a year. I was in a lot of pain during that time. I was bedridden for a long time. But at that time, I couldn't walk even if I wanted to, not just because of pain, but my feet physically were not the right shape. I could not have walked due to how my foot had gone when I was in the cast, so that surgery brought me out of it. Within a year, I was back on my feet using like crutches, and still, I didn't really use a wheelchair back then, but I used crutches to get over the, well, I actually used a Zimmer frame because I didn't have the balance for crutches when I just only had one foot to balance on. But I got out of that 2 years later, sort of thing, 22, I was back to sort of normal for me anyway, that I could put weight on the foot, you know, and it wasn't as bad. But back then I wasn't in a wheelchair or anything like that. So that was around about the age of 21, 22 when I got over that. So now we're gonna go to when I moved out and into my own place. When I was 22 and 23, I moved into the city. Now moving into the city had a huge advantage in that I was right next to the biggest hospital in my local area, even from where I used to live. And it meant that my default doctors and surgeons and orthopedic surgeons and neurologists and everything were, you know, right available to me. So everyone I saw could easily refer me. I started going to a different orthopedic surgeon at this hospital, and he kind of joined the dots and said, look, we're going to put you over to a neurologist because we think your disease is neurological, as is pretty standard of any kind of peripheral neuropathy. Your nerves are the problem connected to your brain, neurological disease, I think. So he put me on to a neurologist, and, you know, to cut a long story short, he put me through to a neurologist that specialised in CMT because that's what he thought I had. They ran the test for CMT, which is the nerve conduction test, where they stick a needle in your hand here and they stick a needle in your arm up here. They do a shock and they measure the time it takes for the current to pass from your finger to your arm. I think mine was something like 17 milliseconds. It's supposed to be a lot faster than that. And that basically diagnosed me with CMT1A. They finally knew what I had, and then the doctors thought that would mean they were on a pretty standard path and they'd be able to work something out. So after I got diagnosed, I saw my neurologist about 6 months to a year later. I live in the UK, and although the NHS is fantastic and free, and I certainly could not afford to be disabled anywhere but here, there is long waits to see a neurologist and stuff like that, so I understood. Anyway, got back to see them about a year later. They said, look, you've got CMT, we suggest physio, but we also suggest you go back to the orthopedic surgeon. I hope I'm saying that right. It's going to be a lot of corrections if I'm wrong. Pretty sure it's orthopedic surgeon. And he will, you know, say what he wants to do. So I went back, and indeed the guy wanted to do pretty intense surgery on my feet. Like very intense surgery, more intense than I already had, because they had gotten a lot worse than they were when I was sort of 18, 19, 20 when I had the original surgery. And this is where I'm going to start going into why I no longer go to hospitals anymore, really. I'm pretty much out of the medical system. I get, I think, a once-a-year checkup with my neurologist. It might not even be that, because she has left the NHS now, so I can no longer afford to have access to her, and I've tried to sort of get a replacement neurologist, and as of yet have not found one, so I'm kind of up in the air with that anyway. But basically, I went to this orthopedic surgeon. He wanted to do this extreme surgery. So he basically explained to me, and this is what made me not want the surgery, he explained to me that your ankle should look like two things like this, and every surgery that we do of your foot, which is below this joint, will rely on this joint holding. If it doesn't, then anything we do below it is not going to matter, because your ankle will not hold up. He then went on to explain to me that, well, most ankles are supposed to look like this, mine is over here, or certainly on the way to being over here, and that was when I was 22 and 23. And yet he was still adamant that he wanted to do the surgery. But he told me in no uncertain terms, and his assistant did as well, that it all relied on that ankle joint, which is pretty much already shot. So you can see why I've turned down that surgery, I think, and decided not to do it. That's one of the reasons. Another reason is I went to my neurologist, I think, 2 years ago, and she was again telling me that she can't believe I've turned down the surgery, that I should definitely get the surgery. And while she was saying all this, I said, well, what does the surgery entail? Because it had been a couple of years since I'd seen the orthopedic surgeon originally. Like, what would it do? And she said, oh, I don't know, you'll have to ask him. So she was adamant that I should get the surgery. Completely. I couldn't believe that I wasn't doing it. And yet, didn't know what it entailed, didn't know how it would affect me, just thought that it would help. Now, I'm not denying, I want to say this to you right now, if you have CMT or any disability, and a doctor and a surgeon and a few medical professionals have explained to you what surgery is, and you think it's right for you, do it. It can help. I had one when I was 18 when I couldn't walk at all. It made me be able to walk for a few years. It gave me independence I wouldn't have had otherwise. But in my personal case, it seemed to me that, you know, I was going to have both feet done. They would have to be done a year and a half apart because of recovery. I live with my girlfriend who works. We could not afford for her not to work. We could not afford a carer. I don't really have anyone else to help anyway. Even if the surgery was going to be fine, the recovery process would be a nightmare for me. I live in a 2-story house. We can't afford to move. You know, everything just added together just didn't seem to work. So that was kind of the top tier reasons why I haven't had surgery. And I'm going to talk about a few more now. Another thing I want to say about the surgery is that even if my ankle joint, you know, was fine, if it was how it was supposed to be, or if it was just a little bit bad, that this surgery is not going to allow me to run a marathon. You know, it's not going to allow me to walk even half a mile. It would give me a little less pain and a little more independence. I still wouldn't be able to go out on my own. I'd never go out on my own because with my crutches and my wheelchair and everything, I just can't physically manage it. Not even going to get into the anxiety and depression side of that. Physically, I cannot manage to go out on my own. So 3 years of surgery and recovery for, you know, to me, I always say that my feet probably operate at 20% of how they should right now in terms of the ability to walk and not be in a lot of pain. If I had this surgery, it might put me to 50% of their use. Might. You know? And for me, that is just not worth 3 years of pain and recovery for potentially nothing. And even if it does work, if it's 100%, if it's the best possible outcome of the surgery, it puts me to maybe 50% use of my feet, which to me, personally, might not be, you know, you might be thinking, well, I would do that in a heartbeat. For me, personally, it's not worth it. Another reason is my disability is degenerative. Regardless of surgery or not, my body is going to get worse. I'm going to lose the use of the majority of the use of my hands. I won't be able to play guitar anymore, which I do a lot. You know, my feet will definitely get to the point where I probably can't even stand as the years go by. And if I'm to rob 3 years from now, for example, so I'm 27 now, I'll be 30 in 3 years. If I was to rob myself of my late 20s to have a surgery which then didn't work, and then my body will have degenerated a little bit more over 3 years anyway, when I could have had 3 years of some kind of independence, or, you know, just living my life as I am now, enjoying what I can of what I have left of my hands and my feet, and playing guitar and playing gigs when I can and being out with friends, stuff which I couldn't do, certainly while recovering from surgery. To me, that is just too big a risk and not enough of a reward. So that's why I turned down the surgery. I hope you understand why. Again, if you are sort of going through the process, if you've had surgery and it's worked, if you've had exactly the same surgery as me and it's worked, that is fantastic and I'm really happy for you. But just, you know, keep in mind, if you're going to write in the comments, I've had this surgery and it worked fine, I think you should do it. Every single person, even the people with the exact same disability, is completely different, especially when it comes to a degenerative disease. It affects everybody differently. So just because it worked for you doesn't mean it would work for me, and vice versa. But that's why I didn't have the surgery. Now you might be thinking, but Sam, you haven't had the surgery, but why not still go to the hospitals and still go to all the checkups? And honestly, for me, that in my mind anyway, is no point in doing that. The only reason I have to really go to the hospital now is to get letters that are proof of my disability, so that when it comes to applying for disability, etc., I have that proof on paper, which, you know, the system is messed up, etc., etc., but that is really the only way to prove that you have a disability. So I no longer go to the doctors. I don't think it would be of any use to me. The depression and the anxiety that comes along with having to go to a doctor's appointment at least once a month, you know, all the time, it's always on my mind. To get very little out of it, you know, I've had I've definitely had hundreds of x-rays, over 100, probably over 200 or 300 x-rays. I've had numerous MRIs, I've had numerous CAT scans. My body is definitely getting worse, but, you know, if everything that I've had relied on that ankle joint being shot at 23, it's not going to have gotten any better now. So for me, I just don't think it's worth it. Now again, you know, if you are still in the diagnosis or pre-diagnosis or even post-diagnosis process of your disability, don't stop going to the doctors just because you're hearing me say it's no use. For me, in my personal case, it just wouldn't benefit me at all. And I know this might be controversial, you might think I'm an idiot not to go to the doctors, you know, you might think that they could be helping me, but until there are some insane advances, you know, I do keep up online with the different medical trials and stuff that are being done in relation to my disability. But until there are some serious advances, there really is nothing for me. There is the option of amputation that I've seen some people with my disability take, and then have prosthesis on their feet or whatever. That is an option. It's extreme. The chances of me getting on the NHS are slim to none. Chances of me affording it are definitely none. So really there is no reason for me to go to the doctors anymore. I will go to a neurological checkup if I get another neurologist, because it's been a couple of years since I've been. I guess you never know what they might say, but I certainly will never go back to being in that routine of having to go to the doctors and to hospital all the time, because really there's just nothing in it for me. The only thing I keep up with now is a medication check at my GP every year or every couple of years, because I'm currently trying to come off the medication I'm on because it isn't working and I want to switch. That will be a lifelong thing. I don't think I'll ever be able to live without any kind of medication, so I'll probably have to keep that up. But as I've said now, I'm rambling. No more doctors for me for the most part. So I hope you can understand why I've made this video. I just wanted to talk about it. I think it's a side of being disabled that maybe doesn't get talked about that much here on YouTube, because, you know, a lot of people want to go to the doctors. If I lived in the US, I certainly could not afford that. My reason would have been a 2-second video. I can't afford it. You know, I couldn't afford to be disabled in America as it is. And it's not that I don't appreciate the NHS over here. I don't want anyone to watch this thinking that I don't appreciate the NHS. It's underfunded, but all the staff that work for it, for the most part, are fantastic. The NHS is great, but they have very little to offer me now. I just want to live my life. I want to enjoy my life, and I think that's what it comes down to the most. If I'm constantly in and out of hospital, it makes my depression and my anxiety far worse, and when I'm out of it, I can just live my life. I can not have to think about it. Yeah, I'm in pain, yeah, I can't walk, I'm in a wheelchair, etc., but I've explained as to why that is, and I hope you understand. Anyway, I think that just about does it for this video. It's been a bit of a sadder video than I usually do, but I've talked about being transparent with you guys, and I wanted to do that today. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, hit the like button down below. It really helps me out. Feel free to share it with any of your disabled friends who may be going through the same thing. And as always, let me know what you think. Do you think I should be going to the doctors? Do you think I'm making a mistake? Is there perhaps treatment you've had that you think could be useful to me? I don't know everything, you know, I'm just dealing with my personal experience. I could be wrong. Do let me know what you think down in the comments. I'd love to hear it. If you have any video suggestions, let me know that too. And as always, don't forget to subscribe and hit that little bell to get a notification every time I post. I try and post a video a week. And as always, don't forget my social media links are in the description and in the end card at the end. Can't remember which way the end is, but either way. Don't forget to check them out. Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat. I post all the time. Would love to see you over there. Thanks so much, guys. Bye.